Differences between listed companies and unlisted companies. Listed companies versus unlisted companies. Listed company is one whose shares are traded on a stock exchange, whereas an unlisted company is one whose shares are not traded on a public stock exchange. The purpose of listed company is to raise funds on stock exchange, whereas the purpose of unlisted company is to issue equity shares that are not traded on stock exchange. Listed company are also known as quoted company or public company, whereas unlisted company are also known as unquoted public company or privately held company. In listed companies, shares are sold publicly on stock exchanges, allowing anyone to buy or sell them. Whereas, unlisted companies are usually owned by a small group of people or private investors, not open to the public. Listed companies are governed by strict regulations of regulatory bodies like Pakistan Stock Exchange and Securities Exchange Commission of Pakistan, SECP. Whereas, unlisted companies are subject to fewer regulatory requirements compared to listed companies. Shares in listed companies can be easily traded on the market because they are publicly available. Whereas, unlisted companies lack market liquidity since their shares are not publicly traded. Listed companies have to share their financial information regularly, providing transparency to investors. Whereas, unlisted companies have more privacy as they're not obliged to share detailed financial reports. Listed companies are usually owned by several shareholders, whereas unlisted companies are usually owned by a small groups or private investors. The liquidity of securities of listed companies are higher, whereas the liquidity of securities of unlisted companies are lower. Listed companies have easier access to money through stock markets where they can sell more shares, whereas unlisted companies might find it harder to raise money since they're not publicly traded. Listed companies have to be transparent in their operations and decisions, facing scrutiny from shareholders. Whereas, unlisted companies enjoy more privacy in their operations and decisions. The volatility of securities of listed companies are higher, whereas the volatility of securities of unlisted companies are relatively lower volatility. Arriving at the market value of securities in listed companies are easier due to the availability of stock prices. Thus, valuation of securities of listed companies are determined by market forces on the stock exchanges. Whereas, arriving at the exact market value of securities in unlisted companies are quite challenging. Instead, estimated market value is used. Thus, valuation of securities of unlisted companies are based on internal assessments or negotiations between parties. Securities in listed companies are traded over stock exchanges, whereas securities in unlisted companies are traded over the counter (OTC) market. Relatively lower risk and lesser chances for exceptional returns in listed companies, whereas relatively higher risk, though more chances for exceptional returns in unlisted companies. Data for listed company analysis and valuation is readily available and accessible to all, whereas no market data is available in unlisted company. Company analysis and valuation of data in unlisted company is a tedious and time-consuming process. Listed companies need to comply with strict guidelines of regulators, such as stock exchanges and SECP. Whereas, unlisted companies may have relatively lesser guidelines to follow. Listed companies regularly share financial information for transparency, whereas unlisted companies have more privacy, not obliged to share detailed financial reports. Listed companies collect funds from many investors, whereas unlisted companies collect funds from a limited number of investors. Market value of listed companies is determined by supply and demand dynamics on the stock exchange, whereas market valuation of unlisted companies may be based on internal assessments or negotiations between parties. In short, listed companies are those that have their shares admitted for trading on regulated stock exchange or securities exchange of country. Whereas, unlisted companies are those that have their shares admitted for trading not on regulated stock exchange or securities exchange of country. Kindly subscribe my YouTube channel Thesis Helper. Thanks for watching.